The spread of the disease has not been contained. There are other hotspots: Louisville, Brunswick, Georgia, Indianapolis. But unlike COVID-19, the first treatment is to take the mask off the problem, to bridge the social distance, and to own what it is. It's racism, unequal treatment for black and brown people, to fix systemically flawed policing patterns, practice, and training methods. And that's where we want to begin tonight. And joining me to discuss the topic is Dr. Jeremy Levitt. He is with FAMU, professor of law, distinguished, joining me from Orlando. Welcome back, Jeremy.
Welcome, very welcome to be with you, Fred, and that was a great introduction.
Oh, well, thank you. Unpleasant, but necessary. And we got a lot to unpack here. The fired officer, let's start with him. Derek Chauvin has been arrested. He's been charged with murder and with manslaughter, for starters. But why did it take 4 days to get this guy behind bars?
Well, first of all, there was a reluctance to charge him at all. And imagine if there had not been video footage. This would have been another justifiable homicide of a black man in police custody. The prosecutors have to take their time. They have to look at the evidence. They have to interview witnesses. They have to have the police reports written, review those police reports. There's obviously a role that the prosecutor has to play with the police to make this determination. And remember that the prosecutor said that there may not be charges 24 hours ago. So the fact that he was arrested and detained and he's been charged with murder in the third degree and manslaughter in the second degree is a step in the right direction, but we have a long way to go.
Well, we've seen the looting, we've seen the fires, not just in Minneapolis, all across the country: Atlanta, New York, San Francisco. But I'd be willing to bet that few, if any, who are doing the looting here can even tell you who George Floyd was or what happened to him.
Well, I don't know. I have to tell you, when I look at the president's comments referring to them as thugs, I don't know what thugs. I've never heard of young white men being called thugs. Mm-hmm. But we know, and we have the footage, that a lot of the looting has been done by young white men. Now, are they consciously engaging in vandalism and looting, or are they a part of a wider movement that basically is saying we've tried everything else and nothing else is working, so we're going to move from nonviolence to violence in our protests? Remember that America appears unable and unwilling to protect African Americans. We're at a critical juncture. Our democratic experiment is being tested and it's failing. And when the young people use nonviolence, as we've seen in every march, the return on that is apathy. But when they use violence, they get empathy. So it appears that violence, unfortunately, is working. And we can't deny that fact. If these people were not rebel-rousing in the streets, we wouldn't be where we are today. These advances would not have taken place.
You know, it's funny that you mentioned it, because when armed white people gained access to the Michigan State Capitol building in broad daylight not too long ago, they were exercising their rights. When the peaceful black and brown people protest the George Floyd killing, again, called thugs by the president. When the looting starts, the shooting starts, is what he tweeted. How do you explain this double standard?
Racism, bigotry, prejudice, anti-black bias, white fear of black and brown people. The president actually encouraged agents of the state to shoot unarmed protesters. Can you imagine that we are in the 21st century? The situation is so bad that the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights issued a statement condemning the killing of Mr. Floyd and the use of excessive force by police agencies throughout this country against African Americans. So this is not just a domestic issue, it's a global issue. And when we look at this closely, we're seeing the traditional cover-up. They want to talk about his record. They want to talk about pre-existing conditions. They want to talk about him not being healthy. They want to move forward with already what appears to be an attempt at giving the officer a legal shield. But I'm going to tell you what, it's not going to work in this case. We're at a watershed moment in American history. There will be accountability, and it's going to come one way or another.
Yeah, we had a guest on maybe an hour or so ago from Minneapolis, and I had asked her about the conception that Minneapolis was this kind of aw shucks, heartland USA kind of state. But then when you look at the history of it, June 15th, 1920, almost 100 years ago to the day, a Duluth mob just outside of Minneapolis lynched 3 black men. So this is not anything new. This has been there.
Well, where do you think they get the name Minnesota Nice from? I think that term has been redefined tonight, and perhaps it's the 3rd precinct that should be in the picture with the title Minnesota Nice. The bottom line is that there's a history of racism throughout the country. Minnesota is no exception. Segregation and lynching didn't just occur in the South, it was nationwide. Police have used militarized tactics against minority communities, and particularly African Americans, for the last 50 years. It began in LA with the SWAT unit and Daryl Gates and expanded throughout the country. So we're seeing a conflation and a systematic pattern of this. And what young people are saying, and what everybody is saying who has any sensibility, is enough is enough. And so we're going to have a redesign of the way that we engage in this society, and particularly when it comes to community policing. The old way of doing things is simply not going to work going forward. And as I've mentioned to you before, if it does, we're going to see more repeat examples of this kind of behavior that we're seeing on the streets where people are extremely angry and upset and hurt. But we're also going to see a repeat of what we saw in Dallas with Micah Xavier Johnson, where he killed 5 Dallas police officers and wounded 9 in total. We're at an explosive moment, and we have to do better.
Yeah, we had the same thing in 2016, the Alton Sterling killing in Baton Rouge, and look where that led and what it led to, where some crazy person wound up shooting some police officers there as well. The other thing I'm wondering about is we're seeing these protests all over the country in different cities. We mentioned a bunch of them. So these protests aren't just for Minnesota. These are protests for people who live in Atlanta that feel as though the police aren't on their side there, or Chicago, or Brooklyn. We saw an image a little bit earlier of people kind of protesting nicely and walking through a park, while in Brooklyn, where the black and brown people live, they were getting billy clubbed, and that was just this evening.
Yeah, I mean, listen, we have a problem with the dehumanization of black people in this country. And it's because we've never come out of the Dred Scott era in the way that we view African Americans. Dred Scott, of course, was an enslaved man who fought for his freedom, and the Supreme Court said that people of African descent, black people, had no rights for which the white man was bound to protect in this country. And so the bottom line is we have still been striving to get the minimal level of protection in the state, and people all over the country feel it. Fred, and we're roughly the same age, and the bottom line is that we grew up in an era where the police engaged in heavy tactics. I was constantly harassed in Los Angeles growing up, abused by police on numerous occasions, to the point where even the routes in which we drove had to be diverted because of police harassment. So this is a multi-generational problem that we have to end, and that doesn't even include the vigilante justice that we're seeing around the country, with white citizens thinking that they can invoke the law and race as a way of trying to control African Americans. It's absurd, and we're not going to let it happen anymore. We have to fight back, and we will, and we are.
All right, Dr. Jeremy Levitt, thank you so much for your insights. As always, he's a professor of international law at FAMU College of Law in Orlando, Florida. Always a pleasure having you with me, and let's do it again soon.
Blessings to you, brother. Thank you.
Blessings to you as well. Floyd's family members are calling for all 4 of the officers involved in the death of George Floyd to be arrested.